If you clicked on this video to see what one of the best scenes in all of cinema is, I won't hold you in suspense, but I must warn you, spoilers will be running rampant in this video. Consider yourself warned. After assembling a stunning army of runaway slaves, Spartacus leads his forces against the might of Rome. They fight valiantly and for the freedom they deeply believe in, but ultimately they lose the battle. The opposing general, Crassus, is determined to stamp out the spark of freedom these former slaves cling to, and offers them a stunning choice. To avoid the terrible penalty of crucifixion, all they have to do is identify Spartacus, living or dead, and their lives will all be spared. Spartacus prepares to do the noble thing and reveal himself, when suddenly the men around him, his friends, his brothers in arms, all rise up and each declare,
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
It's a moment that brings tears to Spartacus's eyes, and ours as well, seeing men willingly condemn themselves to death, all for the sake of a freedom they won't live to see. I watched Spartacus for the first time a few weeks ago, and I've literally thought about this scene every day since then. Most movies you watch and forget, but this one sticks with you because of that one darn scene. And I wanted to discover why it works so well, which of course is what we're going to spend probably the next way too many minutes breaking down and doing. Here's the twist though. To fully understand what makes this scene so emotionally powerful, like what's going on both cinematically and psychologically to make you care, well, then we need to start with an absurd alternate universe idea. I mostly promise this will make sense, and at the very least, it's key to understanding everything else. If Stanley Kubrick's Spartacus was released any time over the last 30 years, instead of in 1960, the final battle would have had a very, very different outcome. To fully appreciate the 1960 version, we need to understand the current expectations of cinema. For example, if Spartacus was released in, let's say, 2005 after Lord of the Rings, this is what would have happened, most likely. Against insurmountable odds, Spartacus and his growing band of freed slaves faced not only a mighty Roman army from the north, but a second, secret army from the south. They would soon be pinned between two of the best fighting forces the world has ever seen. Yet, that band of ex-slaves, led by a leader willing to sacrifice anything for freedom, would pull out a stunning maneuver, perhaps a secret weapon foreshadowed early in Act 1, rally his forces in a manner never before seen by mankind, and crush his enemies in one fell swoop. But this was the year 1960, and epic final climaxes, while still memorable in their own right, didn't need a stunning twist to wow audiences. Spartacus staked its claim in film history through one scene, a moment that embodied the film's deeply rooted theme. The entire 3-hour and 16-minute runtime, extended edition, an eternity by today's movie standards, is justified by a moment of tragic defeat that turned into something much, much deeper. Hey filmmakers, it's Ryan. Welcome to the Filmmaking Notebook, where I teach you filmmaking one scene, shot, and character at a time. Now, I promise this is not going to be a video wildly claiming that all old movies are masterpieces and modern films are trash. I hold an opinion about old movies that neither side of the spectrum of thoughts and opinions in old movies would be satisfied with. I'll leave you hanging on that one. But a few weeks ago, just as I was finishing watching Spartacus, I received several comments on another video that claimed that I clearly, obviously, indubitably, have never seen an old movie in my life. It's so funny how the internet somehow knows everything about you. But this one scene in Spartacus has stuck with me for weeks, and I wish to propose that this scene enter into the Filmmaking Notebook's pantheon of the greatest scenes in all of cinema. If you're new to this series on this channel, I'm hunting down the best 100 scenes in movie history and breaking them down from a filmmaking and psychological perspective. If you have scene recommendations, please let me know. But what makes Spartacus work so well is how a precise, deep theme is the foundation for the entire film. It's what makes the best scene, which we'll explore in detail in a few minutes, actually emotionally resonant. Scenes like this don't just randomly make you feel something. They're deeply designed to make you cheer or weep or do both simultaneously. There's a purpose behind how they're crafted to do that. But to fully understand how this works, we need to understand the context leading up to that scene. So, Spartacus has spent the second act freeing slaves across Italy. What was once a small band of rebels has swelled into a mighty force surging south, their numbers growing daily. Spartacus has purchased passage out of Italy through a host of pirate ships that will sail them far away to lands where Roman legions will never again be able to touch them. But all great films have a precise moment where the hero's best laid plans go awry, forcing him to pivot.
The Cilician fleet, out of strategic necessity, has been obliged to withdraw.
Cilician pirates can destroy any Roman fleet that ever sailed. If they run away now, it's not because they're afraid.
In story structure terms, this signals the start of the final act, where the hero must take everything he's learned and make one final push towards victory, no matter how terrible the odds. No matter the outcome, the pathway to victory or defeat has finally been made clear to him and the audience. But to make matters even worse, immediately after the pirates' betrayal, Spartacus learns that his people have effectively been surrounded by Roman forces. A Roman army approaches from the west and another from the east. To confront one army would mean having the second army attack from the rear, a sure way to suffer defeat. Spartacus realizes that the only real shot at victory is to turn around and march back north to confront Rome itself. Now, full disclosure, this scene, at its core, is exposition, where the hero is learning key information and wrestling with how best to react. So, to disguise the exposition, the filmmakers designed this elegant shot which accomplishes something very specific. First, notice that Spartacus and Antoninus are placed exactly on the rule of thirds lines. The rule of thirds divides our scene into 3 equal sections, creating a visually pleasing look by creating balance in the frame's composition. In this case, that division is created by Spartacus and Antoninus, with Spartacus on the left. Since we read from left to right, we've conditioned our minds to do the same thing when watching movies. It's really subconscious, but we innately understand that our attention should focus more on Spartacus based on where he is in the frame. And this is where the shot gets even better though. Instead of cutting back and forth between Spartacus speaking and Antoninus reacting, we effectively become the map that they're studying and staring at. By framing the shot this way and letting it play out without cutting for nearly 30 seconds, the filmmakers are presenting us with a choice of where to look at in the frame. You can focus on Spartacus working out the situation, or you can focus on Antoninus reacting. It's an incredibly simple setup, but whenever you give the audience intentional guided choices of where to look in the frame, you increase the rewatchability of the film, because we see slightly different perspectives and nuances with each viewing. But this is even cooler. It also works out in 3-dimensional space, as out of focus in the background is Tigranes, preparing to present his contingency plan. The filmmakers present you with the option to let your eyes drift to the background to try to take in how he's perceiving things. The shot only breaks when Tigranes interrupts, creating a natural segue for the story by means of Tigranes giving Spartacus a way out.
Allow me to redeem myself in your eyes. For a very small commission, I can arrange for you and your family, and your leaders, of course, to be smuggled out of Italy and transported to one of the eastern countries where men of substance like you are welcome and appreciated.
Spartacus has every reason to consider his proposal. Of course, he has a wife and a child that's on the way, and up until very recently, he's been a slave his entire life. To be smuggled out of the country and into a life of luxury, far away from Roman rule, would be a tempting choice. But this is where the filmmakers reinforce the story's theme and how it naturally bursts forth through Spartacus, because he doesn't give the proposal even a minute, barely a second of consideration.
Go away.
Go away. Go away.
And this is why this matters, because Spartacus knows that if he abandons the former slaves, his army, his people, then the entire moment, the moment of freedom, will collapse, and he'll be no better than the rich Romans he's rebelling against and has been rebelling against his entire life. But neither is Spartacus ignorant to the reality of the situation. He spent the last months training a host of former slaves for battle, but they're mostly untested, honestly, and about to face the greatest army the world had ever known to that point. At the eve of battle, Spartacus knows that he must inspire not only the men, but the women and children too. And not with a rousing speech about glory and victory either, but one focused on the one thing that they all share in common. This is what makes this so brilliant though. To ground the speech into the reality of the situation, Spartacus is cross-cut against Crassus, the Roman general, who is also addressing his men. But there are 2 major differences between how these scenes are both shot and edited. During the wide shot of Spartacus' speech, notice that he's placed on one of those rule of thirds lines that we discussed earlier. Here, it's designed to present a subtle balance between Spartacus, the leader of his people, and the very men, women, and children he is serving and fighting for. He's not the center of this world, merely the inspiration for why they're all there in the first place. And he's on the opposite side of the image that we'd expect. Our eyes would naturally be drawn to the left first, but it's Spartacus's people that are on the left, subconsciously reflecting that they are more important than their leader, who is positioned to the right. It takes only a fraction of an instant, but we instinctively take in Spartacus only after we take in his people, again reinforcing for us just in the deepest parts of our mind what is more important in this shot. Let's contrast this to Crassus' speech. He is at the dead center of the frame, making himself the entire focus. And his speech is not about Rome or about its people or even the soldiers he's addressing. It seems that way, but at its core, it's about positioning himself as the savior of Rome, about his own glory. Notice that in the edit, we never even see the faces of a single Roman soldier Crassus addresses. But when Spartacus speaks, we see the many faces of those listening, of those whose lives will all be impacted, their deep emotions conveying not only the gravity of their situation, but their belief in the freedom they've been given for however short a time. And just like the films that followed long afterwards, the leader of this scrappy, courageous force knows his purpose: to inspire his people in the face of insurmountable odds.
I'd rather be here, a free man among brothers, facing a long march and a hard fight, than to be the richest citizen of Rome.
To give them purpose, and most importantly, to give them hope. But the film also needed a deeply personal, vulnerable moment for Spartacus, away from everyone but his wife. He knows the reality of the situation, and it's here where the movie's theme truly begins to shine through Spartacus as he speaks of his yet unborn son.
If he never knows me, tell him who I was, what we dreamed of. Tell him the truth. There'll be plenty of others to tell him lies.
And even though he never ever says these words, deep within Spartacus's heart, he knows that he is becoming a symbol of freedom for all the enslaved in the empire. That many will try to squash this symbol and therefore destroy the truth of who Spartacus is in his very soul. To meet tomorrow's battle with courage, he needs to know that, no matter what the outcome, his son will know what his father stood for. And this is where the most important filmmaking element in the entire movie, the very reason you care, starts to play out. But for this to make sense, we need to briefly examine something that's surprisingly less important: the battle. Here's the part that really surprised me when I first watched Spartacus. When the armies finally meet, it begins like all those other epic battles that we've seen in the last 30, 40 years. The forces of good against a mighty, more experienced host.
A great host, you say?
From a cinematic perspective, the face-off looks absolutely stunning, considering that this was shot in an era where the only way to achieve vast battles was to clad as many extras as possible into costume, give them some basic training and direction, and hope they don't actually harm themselves. But if you look at this battle in the context of the greater film, it's a small fraction of the story. Of the 3-hour runtime, less than 10 minutes are devoted to the lead up and the fighting itself. And we don't even see the battle wind down. It simply dissolves into the aftermath. And that's because it's not the battle that's important. I know I joked earlier about an epic come-from-behind victory, but the vast majority of 21st century films would have made a way for Spartacus's forces to achieve victory against all odds. Like, that's mostly what we expect nowadays in cinema. But here, that's not what happens. Spartacus and his forces have been defeated. Considering the entire rebellion consisted of runaway slaves who have attacked and killed many Roman citizens on their path to freedom, the penalty for anyone who survives this battle is almost certainly death. But then this happens. The scene that the entire film builds to and comes down from revolves all around 90 seconds of it.
Your lives are to be spared. Slaves you were, and slaves you remain. But the terrible penalty of crucifixion has been set aside on the single condition that you identify the body or the living person of the slave called Spartacus.
We have to talk about the context. In the context of Roman society, this offer was downright merciful. All one of the survivors had to do was identify Spartacus, and the lives of the remaining hosts would be spared. Look at how the scene plays the tension by taking a few seconds to let us stare deeply into the eyes of Antoninus and Spartacus. Antoninus never betrays what he's thinking. All he needs to do is point to the man next to him, and he will live. And for Spartacus, he knows that this is the end. Not only will he die, but at the hand of yet another betrayal. And then, as Spartacus rises to give himself up, rather than face that betrayal, Antoninus beats him to it and declares himself Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
The men are willing to die rather than give up Spartacus. He has become their symbol of freedom, and it's better to willingly die a horrible death than to betray the man, the symbol, who gave them something they never had before. A hope for freedom, the kind of freedom that's worth giving up one's life for. This is where the most important element in the entire film springs to life. For all its epic grandeur, the soul of Spartacus is its theme. A common misconception is that themes are about morals, the big takeaway. But themes are much deeper and much more powerful than that. Themes are questions to explore. The exploration of an idea through truthful characters who act in truthful ways, who spend the film wrestling with their values and beliefs and passions. In great films, The theme is the foundation that the rest of the story is built on and revolves around. The big question Spartacus makes the characters, and by extension us, the audience, wrestle with is this. What is the true cost of freedom? Notice how this plays out cinematically. How when each slave stands and declares that he too is Spartacus, that it's shot from a low angle, an angle of power, an angle reflecting the ability to choose as a free man, one more time before death. And this is even more powerful because this is contrasted with the close-up of Crassus, who is shot from a much more straight-on angle, reflecting that emotionally, psychologically, he does not have control over these slaves in chains. The angle on Crassus still does shoot up at him in the tiniest way to represent that technically, yes, he still has control over their physical lives, but that slight angle up is contrasted with how the rest of the frame is constructed. A long lens is being used here, which isolates Crassus in the frame and creates a blurry background. We call this a shallow depth of field, which further separates Crassus from the world. The frame is a symbol of the psychological prison Crassus finds himself in. He may have power over these men's physical lives, but he cannot break their spirit. Contrast this to the next shot of Spartacus, where a long lens is also used, making Spartacus the focal point of the frame, but while Crassus was standing alone in his shot, even though he has soldiers with him, Spartacus is framed by the multitude of voices crying out and declaring freedom, even while facing their own deaths. This scene is the soul of the entire film, one of the greatest moments in all of cinema, but in order for it to still resonate generations later and not to ring hollow when Spartacus faces his final moments, we need one more crucial scene, a moment that ties the whole thing together, and that comes near almost the very end. Here, a wide-angle lens is used, and that's designed to let our eyes wander, to take in and interpret the scene as it lingers for the first few seconds, as Spartacus and Antoninus sit, in the dark, awaiting death. And here, they're framed in a wide shot, reflecting their isolation, overshadowed by Roman architecture that represents the vastness and wealth of the empire they hate. We're going to return to the rule of thirds one more time here. Spartacus and Antoninus sit at the bottom third of the grid, but they are still the focal point of the scene, as the shadows have effectively collapsed the frame into just the central third of the image, symbolizing that despite Rome's power, it's not everything. Even the shadows take over its grandeur, and Spartacus and Antoninus are positioned on the left. Again, an intentional choice designed to make sure we notice them first, before the Roman structure that symbolizes everything they're fighting for. And this is where the shot just gets beautiful. Typically, a shot like this would be lit by fake moonlight, creating a bluish glow on the characters. But blue is a cold color, and despite their impending deaths, this scene is about the story's theme, a theme of hope and a theme of freedom. So, a variety of practical lights were incorporated into the shot to motivate a rich orange color that better represents that freedom. These lanterns and wayside fires create key light, motivating the illumination of the characters, while the braziers and campfire motivate the backlight. With a shot this gigantic, there's absolutely no way these relatively little lights would cast this much of a glow on the scene. But our eyes take in the fires and therefore accept the orange hue, rather than the expected moonlight. But why is the color important? Orange is typically associated with warmth, and that reflects Spartacus and Antoninus becoming brutally honest regarding the film's theme.
Could we have won Spartacus? Could we ever have won?
That's just by fighting them we won something. When just one man says, no, I won't, Rome begins to fear. And we were tens of thousands who said no.
And now they're dead.
This is why this line is key. It's important for a character close to Spartacus to wrestle with the pain of their sacrifice, to acknowledge the suffering inherent with their beliefs, that these choices, these consequences, are not made or received lightly. And this is what makes the theme work. It's not through the plot, but through the characters wrestling with and suffering through their values and beliefs, not just speaking words, but by making irrevocable choices that drive the theme forward. The entire plot was shaped around Spartacus's beliefs and the actions he took based on those beliefs. And this is what makes the theme seem to grow so naturally throughout the movie. All of the filmmakers' creative choices were made to serve that central theme. And here's why that's important. Because characters wrestling with theme is an intrinsic part of the story. A good story, a great story, simply cannot exist without theme. Theme is the story's soul. We saw that theme executed on a global level during the I Am Spartacus moment, but here is where we finally see the cracks in Rome's mighty grasp on freedom at a deeply personal level. When Crassus finally realizes who Spartacus is, he commands him to speak. Spartacus answers by looking defiantly into Crassus' eyes, his last act of rebellion against Roman rule. And this causes Crassus to break all of the decorum and temperament expected of a man of his status, and he lashes out in wild frustration. He knows that in the long game, Spartacus has beaten him. He can attack Spartacus' body, but it's here he realizes that his spirit will never break. So in one final, desperate act to prove that he is right and Spartacus is wrong, he makes one final move.
They will fight now for me, here, and to the death. And the victor shall be crucified. We will test this myth of slave brotherhood.
This is a no-win contest, a fight to the death with the winner gaining nothing but the prize of crucifixion. To lose is to endure a quick death. To win is to suffer the most painful death ever imagined. By purely logical, sensible standards, both men should try to lose to be spared the worst fate. But both men fight to win, to spare the other, their friend, comrade, and brother, from an even worse fate. Spartacus even commands Antoninus to stand down so that he can swiftly kill him and take on the crucifixion himself.
Lower your guard. I'll kill you on the first rush.
Won't let them crucify you.
It's my last order. Obey it.
But Antoninus' love for Spartacus, who he sees as a father, is simply too strong. And so they both fight to kill, and therefore spare the other.
I love you, Spartacus, as I loved my own father.
I love you like my son that I'll never see. Go to sleep.
And then, Spartacus declares victory to Crassus.
Here's your victory. He'll come back. He'll come back and he'll be millions.
What Crassus could never understand is that the battle was never for physical freedom. It was for the hope that one day all men could be free. Their movement was to create a catalyst for generations upon generations to follow. Antoninus' death represents all the other men who also chose to die rather than have their freedom taken away. Because the men who declared themselves Spartacus weren't just saving the man, the individual who gave them freedom. They were declaring that they were free themselves, that they had tasted true freedom, and when staring down death, rejected life because they believed in something greater. They believed in what freedom represents. By protecting Spartacus, the symbol of their own freedom, together they could keep that spark of freedom alive. In that moment, they knew that the ability to choose between life and death is a deeper, truer freedom than going back to their old lives as slaves. The entire 3-hour movie is wrapped around this central theme. The pursuit of freedom is worth any sacrifice, even death itself. And with that declaration, Spartacus gained thematic victory over Crassus, a victory over beliefs, a victory more powerful than any physical freedom. An entire 3-hour movie justified and remembered generations later for these 2 lines.
I'm Spartacus!
He'll come back. He'll come back and he'll be millions.
In those lines, remembered forever for the deep thematic truth they represent. I think that's some good cinema.